Hi there. This is number 5 in this series on faith and politics. It's been a few weeks since the last one, so my apologies for that. I'm very busy. That's just the usual reason when I can't do these extra things, which are kind of fun to do, but take up quite a lot of time just to think about. So today for this one of the things that's been going through my mind over the last couple of weeks, I guess, and particularly with some of the things that we've seen taking place around the world and kind of political situations here in the UK and particularly in the United States, relate to kind of how we deal with each other and thinking about the place of empathy in how we come up with our plans, our policies, and all that sort of thing. So empathy is it's that ability that we have to be able to understand and relate to, kind of share the feelings that another person has. So it's that ability to be able to connect, if you like, and enter into their world, into their experience, and to share something of what their experience is. So it's, I mean, the ability to empathize is a massive part of what makes human beings different to most other animals. There may be some empathy that you see in some other animals. Maybe there's research going on about that, but certainly for human beings, the evolutionary advantage that empathy gives for allowing people to live in community, to live with each other, these kind of otherwise pretty autonomous creatures as we are, that we can live together in community. Empathy is a huge part of that, allowing that to happen, because you can read other people. You can understand what their facial expressions, what they're thinking, what's going on there. You can put yourself in their shoes. So then living in community, that is really important and helpful. And especially when you think about consciousness, when you think about the way that your brain works, it's another kind of marker of a big change, big step forward or step up in the level of consciousness that we as human beings have, because you're no longer just living in the kind of first person world, the world of I, or everything focused, like we see the whole world revolving around just ourselves and anything else that happens around us, whether that is some inanimate object or whether that is another creature, another human being. They're just there for whatever impact they have on you. Well, this kind of allows that to empathy allows you to move to this beyond just our own needs and wants, to open the whole door towards cooperation with each other, and seeing that we are part of something bigger, and when we cooperate, when we work together in that bigger way, make decisions together, there's a greater good. It's more than just the sum of the parts. There's something else that kind of takes over. So empathy is important within that. Now, just right from the very get-go here, it's worth saying that there are some people for whom empathy is very difficult, and it's not by any fault of their own. So thinking about people that have are affected, on kind of one extreme of the spectrum of autism, as an example, where there are just in the way the brain is wired, there are complications for them being able to pick up on the kind of triggers and things that other folks are easily, without thinking, can pick up on how other people are feeling, what's going on. So it's harder for somebody with autism to put themselves in another person's shoes. So I'm a little bit wary here of trying to walk this line. So I just want to say that out right at the start, that there are some folks that find empathy challenging because of the way their brain is wired up. It may be some condition or whatever that they have. Now, I'll come on to another part of that in a moment or two. So empathy is, and that other thing is going to be kind of related to psychopathy, so psychopathic kind of individuals. We'll come back to that in a moment. So empathy is when you think about your own, maybe if you think back to childhood, think about your own development and how you kind of grew up to get a kind of moral framework, a kind of sense of what is right and wrong, or what is the right way to act in the world. Empathy was quite important. So you can maybe think about two different things that you might try and teach your if you have children, that teach children. So one thing would be, and most parents would do this, is teaching your child not to hurt other people. So don't fight other people, don't hurt other people, don't go out of your way to make somebody else feel bad, or by actually physically doing something that would hurt them. So that's something that most parents would be trying to instill in their children, that kind of moral frame there of not causing hurt to others. Not all parents. Well, that causes all kinds of issues. Just thinking about experiences at schools where kids are clearly being taught at home to fight back, and I mean that has all kinds of ripple effects then in the school community, which kind of proves the point of this, that empathy is really important. Okay, anyway, not going there today. So you've got this one thing of teaching children not to hurt other people. Now think of another lesson you might give to children, say trying to teach children to put their dirty dishes in the dishwasher. And so that's a problem we have in the house all the time. Children generally would react in quite different ways to these two different kind of instructions, guidance that's been given by parents to children to act in a certain way. Because usually very quickly they will learn that hurting other people is bad because they start to experience it themselves. They once they start growing experience of being hurt by others, they can then draw on that to understand that, ooh, I don't like it when it happens to me, so maybe I won't do it to others. Whereas if it's something like putting dishes in the dishwasher, it really doesn't impact them in any way because mum or dad usually do it anyway. So there's no kind of associated pain or grief for them that comes with it or not doing it. Now, proof of that, in my mind, is that when those same kids end up leaving the house and getting their own place, and maybe there's a dishwasher in that place, they will then get right moany when other people are not putting their dishes in it. Didn't care a hang when they were at home. So they are, because it starts, they are feeling the pain because it's now their place, and when other people don't do it. So empathy is when we're able to draw on our own experience of pain, of frustration, of hurt. It can also be positive, of joy, and in a way then put ourselves into other person's shoes, because we're able to feel the same kind of emotions that they are going through. There's a kind of tangible connection that goes on there. If there was no empathy, if you have no empathy at all, then you get this, instead of being able to kind of judge these different kind of levels because you've experienced it yourself, everything kind of plateaus at the same sort of level. So then hurting somebody else basically, it causes you no more grief or pain or empathy as not putting dishes in the dishwasher. So there's a kind of level playing field to that. Now, there's various kind of experiments have been done by neuroscientists putting folks that have some violent criminals who have psychopathy, so they are psychopathic, um, that of putting them into MRI scans to see what their brain does, what parts of their brain are active when seeing images of other people being hurt by somebody else, and seeing what's going on there. So these are folks that kind of come out with a high score on the psychopathy checklist. If you don't know anything about that, John Ronson's book about being a psychopath is a very funny but quite illuminating introduction to that. So folks that kind of have this are quite high up on this checklist don't seem to have the kind of default ability to empathize with other people, kind of empathize with the feelings that other people have. Though it is really interesting because when in these same experiments, when the folks that were going into the MRI scans were told to try to empathize with the person that was getting hurt, then they could. It would like turn on the empathy. So for most people, having empathy is the kind of default. It's what is turned on all the time. But for some folks, it needs to be switched on. Now, I dare say with all of these things, it's on a sliding scale. So you have some folks that are really empathic on one end, and some folks that have no empathy on the other. Though they may be able to turn it on if they have to, or if they're instructed to turn it on. But there's be a whole kind of range within that. Now, last night went to see the film Get Out. And it's a kind of horror movie, but also kind of black comedy, kind of satire on race relations at the moment. So it's definitely a film for our times, sadly. But a really good film. I mean, worth a watch. Lots of questions it raises. Well, one of the main characters shows just that kind of psychopathic ability of being able to switch on their empathy. You get this wonderful sense of a really empathic person saying all of the right things, really relating to one of the other characters in the story. But then as the story unfolds, you find out that you're confronted really with the reality that that this is not the default for that person. It has all been an act that has been put on. It has been an active decision to be empathic, and they can turn it off as easily as they turn it on. And I guess we're all like that to some kind of degree. There are, I mean, you could think of examples of that where if our neighbor is in need, so somebody who just lives next door to us is in need, and they come to the door and are desperate for some help, most folks are going to be empathic towards them, have empathy for the situation they're in, and will do something to help them. Or if we hear about a friend who is suddenly is thrown out of a job or whatever, and will tend to do something to try and help them. But then when we hear about the desperate plight, say at the moment in South Sudan or places like that where there is terrible drought going on and families are in desperate situations, it's unlikely that we're going to drop everything and spend time trying to help them out, fly out to do something to help or whatever it might be. So we do, all of us have that kind of gradation of empathy, that we're more have more empathy for some than others, and a lot of that's dependent on immediate need, what we see right in front of us at the moment, and what's really tangible to us. Now, when you look at Jesus and his teaching and the way that he lived his life, I mean, one of the key things you get about him is this clear empathy that he has for others. One of the shortest verse in the Bible is this verse: Jesus wept. He is feeling for others. He's sharing in the pain of others, and then seeking to do something about it. And the ways that he'll try and do something about it are very varied in what goes on. But the sense of connection that he has with other people is absolutely clear through all of the gospel stories that comes out. Now here, in the last couple of weeks, we've just had this horrific display of a lack of empathy in politics. Here in the UK, there was a program that was introduced a few years ago called the Dubs scheme, which was a scheme introduced, it's actually introduced by somebody who had been a child, an unaccompanied child refugee to the United Kingdom years and years earlier as a Jewish child trying to escape Europe at the time. This scheme provided for unaccompanied children coming into the UK to get some safety and provision in foster care, so that they would find some sense of hope for the future. And that was ended a few weeks ago, and there was quite an outcry when that ended towards the government for what they were doing, and the government was saying that we've done really enough that we could under that scheme, and there are not enough places, and councils are saying there are not enough places for housing these children, so no, we can't do anything more about that. And so that was maybe a month ago, and then just a week or so ago, I was reading some evidence that had just come out from various different fostering agencies and charities in the UK, and that they had been lobbying the government, saying, no, 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 there is plenty of support that we can provide. Up to 100 children could be found homes per week, they were telling the government, and yet the government decided to close it down anyway, that scheme. So for some of the most desperate situations, and children in really desperate situations, it just smacks of a complete lack of empathy towards them, to kind of cut off or close the door on them in that way. And then so that's been kind of something happening here in the UK, and of course you've seen many other different things when you start digging in. Of course, in the United States, we've seen the launch of a new healthcare plan, the American Healthcare Act, AHCA, AHCA, which sounds like a perfect kind of acronym for something that is going to ruin. Estimates are up to 24 million people losing their healthcare insurance in the United States over the next 10 years or so. When you kind of dive down into the details of it and see what's going on there, and then pull yourself back to getting the overview of, well, what does that actually mean? What is happening here is a massive tax break for the wealthiest folks in America, and all of that tax break being paid for by cuts to the provision or increases in cost, which are predominantly increases in cost that are placed on the poorest there. And it is pretty shocking what some of that has been about. There was, there's a guy called Paul Ryan who was giving some really deeply misrepresentative arguments about what's going on. Here he was giving a PowerPoint presentation and being completely dishonest about the nature of what healthcare insurance is. When he was giving that, and you can kind of see in the wee pie chart there this little red sliver. The red sliver was to represent those who are sick, the people that have sick and that have sick. What am I talking about? The people that are sick, and so medical provision has to be provided for them. And he was making this argument that the bigger chunk there, the healthy kind of people, all of the healthy people have to pay for the medical provision of the sick. And he was saying this like this is a bad thing. Like, isn't this unfair that if you're healthy, that your premiums that you're paying in are going towards the sick? But of course, that is the whole point of insurance. When we're paying our car insurance, we know that we're our payments, our premiums are going to pay for those who may have the misfortune of having a car accident, and making sure then there's enough money in the pot to pay for those. It's just that is the way insurance works. When you are not needing it, your money goes in, and that helps to pay for others. And if it ever came a day when you need it, then you'd be desperately hoping that there is a similar pool of healthy people that will be paying their premiums in to cover you for insurance. So this deeply, it's this completely surface level argument about what's unfair and what's fair that it's just absolutely distorting the whole point. So any sense of empathy there, utterly gone. Now, there are some stories that have come out about this, like some elderly rural people will see their insurance premiums under this plan rise in the most extraordinary level. There's a story being going around because it's part of what the OMB, I can't remember what it stands for, but that's the bipartisan group that has been costing all of this, and had come out with their understanding of what the costs would be, both financial and kind of somewhat in terms of what kind of provision could be laid out. And so the stories of this 64-year-old person living in a rural setting, maybe earnings of $24,000 or something like that. Currently, under the Affordable Care Act, which is sometimes called Obamacare, they'd be contributing $1,700 into the pot, their premiums. That will rise to $14,600. Their total income, $24,000. Insane. Completely insane. What does it matter? What does it mean? Of course, it just means that they won't have health insurance. No one could be able to afford that, so health insurance would go. Now, the Speaker of the House, this same guy I had the picture of there, yesterday was joking about the cuts to Medicaid. Now, Medicaid is a part of the American healthcare system, which provides financial assistance to the least wealthy, so that they have some healthcare provision. Well, and that was expanded quite a lot under the Affordable Care Act, the current system, Obamacare. And he was talking yesterday at this audience for the National Review and an event, and he actually said this: "We've been dreaming of this being cutting Medicaid. We've been dreaming of this since I've been around, since you and I were drinking at a keg." In other words, since student days, he has been dreaming of cutting Medicaid. And then there was a huge laughter from the crowd gathered when he said that. So since he has been a student, he and those like him have been dreaming of this day of being able to cut health provision for the poorest people in the United States. Just think about that for a moment. And a lot of these same people that are doing this are the same folks that talk about their own faith. Now, for me, what faith, and in particular what Jesus provides as an example to us all, is that empathy matters. It really matters. And it's not just something that you turn on when you think it's expedient to turn it on, but rather that it should be the default. It should be on all of the time. And if you find it hard to do that, because of who you are as a person, you find it hard to do that, maybe if you are slightly towards one end of the psychopathy scale, then you should be constantly reminded and be telling yourself to turn it on. If that evidence about these MRI scans is correct, that somebody who has is more towards a psychopathic end of the scale can turn it on when they want to, then you need to turn it on all of the time. Make sure that you are doing that. John, writing in one of the first of his letters that are in the New Testament, the Bible, this is chapter 13, verse 17, has this very simple little line. How does God's love abide in anyone who has the world's goods, all the world's goods, and sees a brother or sister in need and yet refuses to help? So you can have everything. If you don't do anything to help, then how on earth is God's love abiding in you, living in you, kind of seeing itself out in you? And so it's there, that crossover between seeing somebody like Paul Ryan in this a complete lack of empathy towards other people, and that idea of what Jesus was talking about, what you see all throughout the New Testament in the Bible, this idea of God's love, drawing out our empathy, raising our empathy to a higher level so that we can put ourselves in other people's shoes and walk with them and do what we can to help them. When you see this division between these two things, it just makes me wonder. Well, it makes me angry, to be honest. This utter lack of empathy towards the plight of fellow humans. It is deplorable. It is awful to see. Now, how the likes of Paul Ryan wraps this up, and there's fascinating politics going on at the moment between Donald Trump, who has been going on and on about repealing Obamacare and replacing it with something better. Well, this is the replacement that is supposed to be better. Absolutely going to be destroying some people's lives. I mean, literally, it's going to be destroying some people's lives. The only healthcare provision they're going to have will be going to accident and emergency equivalent, to the emergency room. No long-term, they won't be able to, for like cancer care, cancer support, anything like that. And that's gone. I mean, you just won't have any of that if you can't afford it. Well, the way they kind of try to get around this is that it's all about greater choice. It's all about providing better choice to people. But that is completely false if it means the costs spiral out of control, or the provision that you have at a cost you can afford is decimated if that provision just disappears. So many of you will know that I'm a great advocate of electric vehicles, electric cars. Now, and I think Tesla are doing a fantastic job in creating electric cars that are aspirational. They're wonderful devices. The technology is brilliant, and it really gives a spur and impetus to others. So Elon Musk, he could go on about how wonderful his new Tesla Model X 7-seater is and how perfect it would be for us as a family with 4 kids. And isn't it brilliant to have the choice of this wonderful Tesla Model X in the marketplace? But that Tesla Model X costs £100,000. So it is not a choice, because we could never, ever afford it. So to lay on all these tiers at a level which is way beyond any ability of most people to be able to pay for it, it isn't choice. It is completely a false choice, and it's a false argument. So in a similar way, providing greater choice in healthcare plans, but they are all unaffordable for the poor, is no choice at all. It's a complete slap in the face then to remove it from those who won't otherwise be able to afford it. So that's just an amazing example this week of, or the last couple of weeks, of a complete lack of empathy within politics. So But it does raise a whole issues about what the balance is between economics and empathy. And it really highlights the problems that we have with a kind of neoliberal economics at the moment, which is all profit driven. It's all about the bottom line. It's about shareholder value, about short-term thinking of trying to get the most money as possible in the short term to satisfy the needs of shareholders. Um, but it doesn't have to be that way. Now, you think about some of the companies going back a couple of 100 years ago. I'm thinking in particular of companies like Cadbury or Roundtree, and interesting, both of those companies were founded by families that had a faith background. They were Quakers, or was it Quakers? I think it was Quakers. Well, I might have to check that to make sure that was right. But it was very much part of what they were doing. And of course, they were building businesses, big businesses that made a lot of money. But there was a sense of empathy in doing it, and particularly to those who were their workers. So these are some of the companies that built whole new towns with schools, with play areas, with facilities for their workers, because it wasn't just about the bottom line. It was about creating a society where you are caring for one another, and part of the value and part of the profit that is raised goes to all. It wasn't all about creating profit only for those at the top, which is sadly where we have arrived at under our neoliberalism at the moment. So it wasn't always like that. And it doesn't have to be like that either. We see different models of capitalism at work around the world and in different countries. We see it around Europe, where different emphasis is given. We see it in Scandinavia, we see it in France and other places where the kind of skew to capitalism is different to what we have here in the UK and what is going on in the United States, and would tend towards a more empathic response for all, where there's less inequality and a greater sense of putting yourselves in other people's shoes and trying to do something that is for that greater good. And there may be costs to the bottom line, to shareholder value, in order to do that. But society as a whole that says, yes, that is a decision we want to do. We want to be more empathic, to have more empathy for each other, and so we're going to gear our system towards working that way. And I mean, that is just, it feels like that is not a discussion that is going on here in the UK at the moment. There was a part of that discussion going on in the United States during the primaries, with Bernie Sanders pushing for a more socialist agenda, a more socially aware agenda, a more empathic agenda there, which got great traction. And funnily enough, on the other side of things, on the Republican side of things, it was also part of what Donald Trump was doing in trying to provide make some kind of connection with those who were working class or kind of lower middle class, who were feeling that things weren't improving, and that sense of I'm with you, I share that, and I'm trying to do something for you. Of course, anyone who knew anything about Donald Trump knew that was, I mean, it was all acting. That was turning on the empathy. It wasn't real empathy. And all the decisions that are being made now are really flying in the face of a lot of what is going on there. And this healthcare is a prime example of that, where it's actually going to hurt people, and the poorest in particular. It's going to hurt more than it is going to help. Here in the UK, I am really worried, especially as we're heading towards Brexit, leaving the EU, that we are actually going to be heading towards an even more neoliberal free market kind of capitalism, which there'll be even greater inequality. And there is no discussion going on about this kind of level of what kind of society do we want to be living in? What kind of level of empathy do we want to have for everyone across society, so that that is represented then in the policies that are going to be made? And for me, as somebody who is somebody of faith, that is part of a community of faith, that is really important to me. That sense of empathy is part of the decisions that we're having, and we need it. We desperately need it, but I worry that it's not. It's just not happening at the moment. So, empathy. There you go. Today's wee theme on this Faith and Politics series. Okay, hope to talk to you later with another issue, and then I think that there may be another episode for my living with the Renault Zoe, my electric vehicle, coming in the next few days as well. All right, have a good weekend, or whatever time it is when you are watching this, and catch up with you later. Cheers now. Bye.